the Golden Demon. Games Workshop's premier event that showcases the talent of painters from all over the world competing for the top 3 in multiple categories. And among these winners, one lucky person will lift the prestigious Slayer Sword trophy as recognition for the best entry the show had to offer. Each year, painters flock to Adepticon for the chance to fulfill a childhood dream of winning a Golden Demon trophy, and it was no different this year, as the breakdown proves. There was 16 out of 37 triumphant painters that never won a Golden Demon before, and among all the winners, 11 different nations were represented. Painters travel for hours and sometimes days for a shot at holding one of these trophies. And today I want to look at the results and show you my favorite winners of this year's Golden Demon Adepticon, as well as a few gems that did not place in the top 3, but that also are absolutely gorgeous and maybe even a bit too creative for Games Workshop, for which this is, and let's not forget that, also a marketing event. So join me in looking at these creative, intricately crafted pieces that painters spend hundreds and hundreds of hours on and sometimes pour their heart and souls in. And we will start with the first category, 40k single, which saw 3 winners that in a way were really different. I'll explain that in a bit. The third place was claimed by this Dante by Magnus Magdi, also known as Magnus Nielsen. And mighty are his brush skills indeed. Just look at how well blended all of this is. It's kind of difficult to think about all of these secondary and tertiary reflections and to produce a believable pattern and cram it all into a confined space like that. And all of that while making it look smoothly blended. I particularly like the glow effect and the line pattern of the reflections of the axe. I will say though, I'm a bit fatigued by seeing non-metallic gold Dantes. It has become the thing to do if you wanted to show off your insane non-metallic metal gold skills, and I must have seen dozens of very similar versions by now. But of course that's just me, and it doesn't change the fact that this is a really great piece and a well-deserved Golden Demon, because all of the skill involved to create it. So initially I said we have 3 very different entries here, and the silver winner shows this already. Nicholas Rubens Mortensen, another Danish painter and Golden Demon regular, we already know him from a ton of other result reviews, wins another trophy with his version of Unith Erita. And he positioned this one in a really smart way, basically taking the backside of the flying throne and turning the mini by 180 degrees, where now she's looking down the flight of stairs and being flanked by 2 statues holding a torch. Really simple yet super effective switch. This entry is different from Magnus Dante in that it is done in a more subtle style. The focus is less on trying to shine with a lot of complex reflection patterns. This is very subtle. Yet anyone that ever tried to paint black this way knows how difficult it is to pull off. And there isn't just one black. There's different types of texture, for example, the more reflective nature of the armor opposite the more matte appearance of the robe. And when we look at the backside that is not shown on the Games Workshop website, we can also see some simple but gorgeous non-metallic metal detail and the subtle reflections on the backpack. And as we move into the gold winning entry in this category, we see a Big Mac by Thibaut Ram, leaning more into different intense colors. The red and the yellow on the armor, and of course the very bright skin of the orc, and then also very different rougher textures like the scratches on the armor, the leather structure, and of course all the rust and weathering both on the figure and the giant custom base. On Thibaut's Instagram you can also see the small conversions he did, mainly getting rid of a few details so he could focus more on getting all surfaces properly defined. Now with a system that only awards the top 3 in a category, each Golden Demon also leaves tons of awesome entries without a place in the spotlight. But I like to also spend at least some time talking about a few entries that did not place on the podium, but left me impressed in one way or another. Luckily, I had a few people that attended Adepticon send me a few pictures, and also Games Workshop has started to put up pictures of the finalists a few years ago, which is good because it showcases the quality of the competition a lot better, even if you are not at the event. And one of my favorites in this category was the Sarek sitting confidently on his throne, and while it probably was not on the level of the winning entries as far as the painting goes, it's just a really great scene. I like how the standing pose has been converted to a sitting one, and I couldn't find out if the throne was 3D printed or handcrafted, but I just really like the look of it, especially the grate in the center. As we move into the next category, that is 40k unit or kill team, I gotta say that the switch to not having to use gaming bases for entries in this category anymore has led to a lot of people saying it feels like a second diorama category. And I can see that critique being somewhat valid because it's not often anymore that we see winners that are not presented on the show base. And I definitely like the show base David Diamondstone created for his entry. It looks simple on first sight, but it is an intricately crafted scene inside what looks like a ruined building of the Ecclesiarchy. I didn't quite understand it the first time I looked at it, but the wings are designed to be shiny. They're reflecting the sky. There's a little hint to their polished nature in the front where we can see the red cloak reflecting. And again, when we look at David's Instagram and see the backside, it becomes a lot more evident where we can see the clouds. And I also really like the definition of the faces. Gives them a lot of expression. The non-metallic metal looks a little simpler on first sight, but it's still really well executed. It just doesn't have the amount of secondary and tertiary reflections we saw in some other entries so far. So you have been looking at all these gorgeous minis wearing this old rag of a shirt, and I bet you've been wearing it for 3 days straight too. How about you dress for the occasion with Into the AM? They're my all-time favorite clothes company, and ever since I tried on their first t-shirt years ago, my collection has been steadily growing to the point where I'm hardly wearing anything else. They're best known for their awesome graphic t-shirts. My all-time favorite shirts are from the vintage range, 100% cotton, and I just love their creative motives, ranging from the fantastical to the mythical and back again. It's just perfect for nerdy folks like us. I use their active tees to work out, relaxed button-up shirts when it's hot outside. Their basic range is my go-to for everyday apparel, and now the range also includes denim jeans. Hey, eyes up here. While the vintage shirts are a bit more muted, the graphic tees range also includes more striking colors, and these prints are made to last. This is the oldest Into the AM t-shirt I own, and I don't remember how often it has been washed, but nothing has cracked and it's as pristine as on the first day. Right now they're offering up to 40% off of their graphic tee bundle deals, so if you ever thought about giving Into the AM a try, now is the right time, and using my referral link in the description will give you an extra 10% discount on top of existing discounts. So what are you waiting for? Give your wardrobe a refresh with Into the AM and look good in any situation. One observation I had from looking at all the entries is that this edition of Golden Demon felt a lot more grounded. While there's a handful of scratch builds and ambitiously and creatively crafted miniature scenes in the mix, I feel like the trend continues where the focus is on painting miniatures out of the box. And now, I don't think that is a Games Workshop push, but probably more the participants going back to it, or people simply not having enough time. Remember, the last few events came off of a pandemic with everyone having a ton of time to invest into building really big and creative projects. Another thing that I noticed was that this set of judges seems to value the more creative and less simple definition of armor again. Lots of complicated reflections painted on reflective armor, even if it might be a little less smooth than what has been dominant a few years ago and has been described as the heavy metal style dial up to 11. Simpler but very clean, and maybe even a tiny bit less contrast. There's definitely a move to chromatic, high contrast finishes in recent years. And speaking about all of that, silver goes to Kentaro Ikeda from Japan, painting this Blood Angel squad that is a bit of a tribute to Gareth Nicholas' Blood Angels from 2018. It even has very similar details in the pattern. And it is kind of funny to me since we are coming full circle on this, because back then I started a Golden Demon entry for 2019 after I returned to Golden Demons in 2018, and I was painting a Stormcast Griffcharger in a very similar style with lots of non-metallic metal and sky earth effects. But then the shift happened away from these back to a cleaner and simpler heavy metal style, and I ditched my entry completely because I thought there was just no way this could win again. But here we are, and almost every entry has this type of definition again, so maybe it's time to come back. But yeah, Ken's entry features another Dante with an intricate non-metallic metal pattern, and each of these regular Blood Angels probably took days to flesh out and would give the 40k single category a run for its money. Again, the contrast gets pushed a lot with the red armor going from black shading all the way up to white highlights. I also like the freehand pattern, but hey, I'm a banner and freehand enjoyer, so I might be biased. The gold winning entry is also a squad of sisters, and what I like about this entry is the blue steel armor. That's something we don't see executed to this level very often. Another thing I like a lot about this entry is the texture on the inside of the cloak and of course the banner. It almost looks like we can see every knot of the fabric, intricately reflecting some light. One notable finalist in my opinion was the scene showing what I think is Azurman and a bunch of different aspect warriors, reproducing this 2nd edition Elder Codex cover art by Jeff Taylor. It's gaudy and over the top, just like the art, and I don't want to know how many hours must have gone into converting and customizing these sculpts. There's also a ton of great freehand work in there, and I just love the gold parts that have these sky-earth reflection effects, just like the old Warhammer logos had. And this entry by Ben Comets shows us some old Forge World Krieg minis and a Cities of Sigmar Ogre, fantastically converted into an Ogren. That's the stuff I like to see in Golden Demons. In Warhammer 40k large model or vehicle, we find an entry that we talked about back in October when I made this video about the Golden Demon in Essen, Germany. And Aaron Clark also entered this and did not place back then. But here it managed to win a bronze demon, and I find it extremely hard to win with a Tyranid entry, since the sculpts are this amalgam of different materials. On one hand, more insect-like exoskeletons, but also what looks like skeleton structures and other arthropod carapaxes and armor plates. It's really difficult to tie all of these individual elements together, and if you paint every element a different color, they become very colorful very quickly. But Aaron managed to find some middle ground, and it took home a 3rd place. 2nd place went to this Orc Trike. The official picture does not really place this in a favorable light as it's taken too far away, but looking at Dave's Instagram reveals all the intriguing details he put into this entry. And finally, gold goes to James Taro with this Genestealer Walker. Ellie, who is one of my patrons, shared this picture with me, showing some entries of this category, and I found it quite interesting. First of all, you can see the new pins that are now color-coded with notable equaling a bronze-colored pin, commended being represented by a silver pin, and finalist having a gold color, which makes it similar to an open system, at least on this level, where multiple people can get bronze, silver and gold pins, which in my opinion was an absolutely great move by Games Workshop, because this way entrants have a much better idea about where the judges saw their entry ranked in the competition, and you can get a feeling for the skill level you are roughly at. The top 3 of each category are then decided amongst all the entries that got a finalist pin. This adds a bit of excitement to the procedure, but it also is a nice nod to the entrants that make it to the stage, having their names up on the big screen. But I also think this picture shows the cool variety of styles that we get in Golden Demons competing against each other. Again, more of a high contrast style in the middle versus 2 types of more traditional weathering. One of them using pigments and other techniques from scale modeling, while the other one is weathered more with regular acrylics and brush paint. Ellie kindly let me use some of her pictures. She's a professional photographer that attended Adepticon. There's a link to her website in the description if you are ever in need of someone who can take amazing pictures, even under difficult circumstances like the very poorly lit cabinets at Golden Demon. I want to mention one particularly disgusting finalist in this category. Malcolm Park's Nurgle, I guess Dreadnought or Hellbrute. It's some great customization work. The legs on his back really tingle my arachnophobia, and these eyes just look really creepy. In Age of Sigmar's single miniature, we see another Golden Demon regular taking home another trophy, Katarzyna Gorska. I'm always amazed by her bases. If you check her Instagram page, you can see multiple examples of that. And if we take a look at this mini with a black background, then you can see how horribly overexposed most of the winning pictures on the Warcom website are. So this Taurus is a gorgeous piece painted in a more artistic interpretation when it comes to colors and details. It looks a bit rushed in some places, like the lantern area, and there's also no real detailing on the scrolls, for example. It almost looks like a ghostly figure, a non-corporeal form of this Stormcast hero. The focus being more on expressive brushwork and less on being grounded in the lore and background that Games Workshop provides. Just something completely different than we would expect in a Golden Demon. Aaron Clark wins another demon with the Slaanesh Vexmore, also a very striking and intense color scheme, full of intense and chromatic colors. Winner of this category is Nicholas Rubens Mortensen again with this Epidemius Talisman of Nurgle. He gives us more views on his Instagram, also showing the conversion work, some clever use of different bits and a little bit of putty. And he also gives us the model that was the inspiration for this. I just like how Nicholas manages to build a large range of contrast in all of his pieces while keeping the intensity of the colors high. And through his stippling approach also creates the illusion of smooth blends and transitions, while building some nice texture at the same time. There is also a lot of color transitions in this model, and the little scene is just hilarious. The way all these Nurglings perform all kinds of shenanigans around him. All of the edges are very crisp and everything looks almost like printed, not painted by hand by a human being. Just look at his hourglass, for example. Brennan Baker gave us another version of Tornus, and what stands out to me in this entry is the metal work. The gold is simpler than a lot of the non-metallic gold we saw already, but it's really effective in what it tries to do, setting the mood of a darker rendition with a few high contrast reflections in all the right places. And the wings just have this liquid metal vibe that I never really thought about when I saw the design. But I just love the creativity here, getting the idea of rendering it that way alone. It's definitely a grittier and more real interpretation than the third place Tornus. Every material is clearly defined and rendered versus a more fantastical interpretation, where all materials transition into each other. The scrolls have some scribbling on them, the red cloth looks like material you can actually touch, and the metal just feels real, which is not easy to do because of all these complex shapes. I'm not sure where the red glow came from initially, and I thought I would really like to see some sort of light source on the base, since clearly it seems to be coming from below. But looking through the pictures on his Instagram and seeing the additional angles makes me think it's supposed to be the red cloth reflecting in all of the metal. And maybe that's a bit too intense in some places, like the lower parts of the chest armor, but I still love this model. Amazing result and deserved finalist. Warhammer Age of Sigmar Unit Warcry Warband or Underworld's Warband. The category is quite a mouthful to say, and in it we see this cool Crimson Court scene that was absolutely butchered by the angle Games Workshop decided to take pictures from, and this Idoneth Deepkin warband that has some lovely metallic work. My favorite though is this Snarl Pack Cavalry unit, a perfect example how a proper show base and thinking about how to mount minis on the base makes a unit entry become more than just 3 individual minis placed next to each other. By putting them laterally on the show base and each of them at a different height just makes this look very dynamic. It almost feels like you can see them running by in the distance and you almost expect them to just jump off that base edge and keep running. And this is definitely one of my favorites in all of these entries. Warhammer Age of Sigmar Large Miniature or War Machine brought us this griffin with a rider composed of some cities of Sigmar body and a helmet by some old world faction that I don't know. Apparently Nathan broke his hand while working on this entry and he was in a lot of pain while trying to finish it, so he was extra happy that it took home a trophy. Silver goes to John Ninas of YouTube fame. He placed his VINCI on a base that has a little underground scene integrated and that he backlit with 2 tiny green LEDs that create little glowy red eyes lurking in the deep, which is not super visible in this picture, but it's an awesome effect. Apparently Games Workshop broke John's piece again. Before they were taking pictures, they asked him to fix part of the rocks and rubble splashing outwards from the base. I guess some people get kicked from the partner program if they are too critical, and others will just forever get their Golden Demon entries broken. There was another VINCI in this category that I liked a lot. It was entered by Lucas Saba and it got a finalist pin. And one reason why I like this was smoothness. Like I said earlier, it seems like Golden Demon moved away from rewarding perfect renditions and blending, and it's looking for high contrast. So as impressive as this version is, this might also have been its downfall. Another detail that was amazing was the work on the fur. Just look at the level of detail and how credible all of these little hairs look. Almost like real fur. Maybe it looked a tiny bit too fluffy for a mini like VINCI that oozes that impending doom more than anything. Another thing that might take away from the imposing nature of this mini that costs a whopping $160 in the Warhammer Online store due to its size and complexity simply is the giant door in the back. It creates a size reference that makes it look small, because this door kind of looks like a man-sized door, and that just makes him tiny and unimpressive. But yeah, I love the smoothness, the texture, and technique-wise, I think this wiped the floor with most entries in the category, but it just wasn't meant to be for Lucas this time. Gold went to this Iridan, the Witness, and from this angle you can instantly understand why this piece won. Even before just looking closer at the pigments pushed on there, the way the custom base's interaction with the mini is guiding your eye, how the tree forces a line from the lower parts through the head and through the body and then coming up behind the griffin is just glorious. The digitally designed and 3D printed base is lush and complex. The snow on top of the green and the cherry blossoms in the back give us a clear sense of spring arriving and puts this mini into a living and breathing world. And the gold is fantastic, and all structures are rendered with a great range of contrast and color intensity again. The feathers look super credible and were most likely inspired by real-life references. It's always a good idea to do that when it comes to anything that we know from reality. Otherwise, it can look jarring very quickly. All of the cloth looks amazing, the way it's highlighted, adding a light effect, dancing on these folds, and I also like the patterns on the axe and the blue flame in the back. The base looks super realistic. I almost expect him to jump off the base and just fly away. One thing I will say though, the angle we see here is definitely the money shot. On Instagram we can find a few additional angles, and while I get it, there is just a lot of feathers on this model and it can become tedious. There's a few areas that are painted very minimally, which in my opinion is showing again that there has been a giant shift in how this competition is being judged nowadays. Because for a long time it was also about consistency and maintaining the same quality all over the miniature. The Horus Heresy is this weird mishmash of a category where you can enter anything from single minis to war machines, tanks, and even Primarchs. And so this year we also see a full Grim painted by El Kai in this lovely turquoise and purple color scheme. A second place goes to this Thousand Suns Sorcerer by David Diamondstone, taking home his second demon, and I really like the subtle reflections on the red as well as the gold scarab emblem on the chest. The base has this little jackal head carved into it, very thematic, and I think this is the first time in a while that we see the spark effect on the helmet, jumping off from the intense glow within the eyes of the head. First place goes to one of my favorite minis in the competition. I guess it's just the overall atmosphere of the piece, the tip of a dark elder barge perfectly integrated with the base, and I also like the wiggly freehand on it. The mood of the piece is really great. Most of the colors are very muted and it's a very limited and cool palette. Even the desaturated red fits that color temperature. And then the slight warm glow from below reflecting in the hooks, it's just gorgeous. I like the slightly green halo around his head, and I dug up Eric's Instagram to see a close-up of the head. There's just so many subtle color shifts going on. The patterns of the armor are very unique, but they fit perfectly and define all the shapes in an interesting way. Third place in Warhammer The Old World goes to Tyler Mengel, who painted this Tomb King Herald, and Magnus Nielsen wins another trophy with his lovely rendition of the White Dwarf. Gold went to Raphael Boyon with this Chaos Dwarf on Manticore, and I was impressed with the picture, even though the angle at which it is photographed is super weird. But when I looked this up on Instagram, I was not only impressed, I was blown away. But let's take it step by step. When it's presented at the right angle and with a black background, the wing membranes just look unreal. They look like light is shining through actual wing membranes. It's insane. I also like the volumetric highlights on the muscles and the smooth blends, and how there seems to be light coming up from the cracking ground. And speaking about cracking ground, the whole base is digitally sculpted, and each of these rocks exploding out from the side fits together perfectly. Seems like a small detail, but this is the level of work Raphael invested here. And it doesn't stop there. Here's the artwork that inspired the miniature, and this is a collection of references he used, and here's where it gets really crazy. The beast was designed from the skeleton up, then covered in muscles so that it would look proportionate and like the anatomy could actually work. Crazy. Middle-earth always sees very similar minis win. I think there's a few clear fan favorites among the range, definitely this Elrond, and we also get to see Glorfindel on Horse a lot. A gold in this category went to a familiar face, Alexander dos Santos. Also a past Slayer Sword winner shows off his skill in a very subtle way here, creating an awesome base with the darker grass framing the brighter scene and directing attention up to the intricately textured stone and the very crisp paint job with the main reflection on the chainmail and very crisp reds. I also like how much detail is on the face, considering how small especially the Lord of the Rings figures are. And one of my favorites from this category was Henrik Mikkelsen's scene centered around Saruman and Grima Wormtongue. It's a cool little scene with the architecture of the tower surrounding it, and the way light is placed on it is just gorgeous. How this was not awarded anything is a little beyond me. Some of these work in progress shots on his Instagram really illustrate how you can shape sculpt with paint. Just look at how different this face looks in two different interpretations of the same shapes. My favorite entry in the Blood Bowl category was this Chaos Dwarf. I was especially intrigued by the muscle fire. We often see explosions going from bright yellow to orange and red and then black, but I like how this combustion looks probably closer to the real thing, with fire in the center and the brighter smoke surrounding it. It takes a lot of skill to do the brighter colors without looking unrealistic. I think Steven has really nailed it here. The Necromancer category saw 3 very gritty entries. I really like the macabre story the bronze entry is telling, and I always like the little scenes this category encourages. Gold went to Magnus Nielsen again with probably the most crisp execution of the 3. I'm not a fan of the chipping, it feels a little too artificial, but the leather texture and especially the rendition of the textured skin is what stood out to me. The epic scale category always feels like it's a place to create these fantastic dioramas that you just can't build otherwise, because using the bigger scale minis would be insanely expensive and also they'd be huge as fuck. But the smaller scale offers room to experiment and go crazy, like the silver entry by Ivan Bocic impressively illustrates. I also like the intense colors he managed to build on these metallics, but also the ground, and of course the little guy down here bracing for impact takes the cake. The gold winning entry takes all of that and dials it up to 11, putting a backdrop with a whole landscape and spaceships in the background, creating a whole different scope and scale to the scene. I also like how the scenery integrates with the terrain parts on the scene, and of course the slightly converted pose adding more movement is really great. The diorama category illustrates a bit what I mentioned when I was talking about the unit categories. In a way, the 3rd place entry could have very well been entered into the 40k squad category. But that doesn't change the fact it's a great little scene with a lot of detail and movement, and I like how the banner curls in the wind and adds to that. And no golden demon would be complete without the piece involving 10 squigs hopping around and causing mayhem. And I also enjoyed that with all the giant and ambitious dioramas in the last few years, a rather small and somber scene could also take gold in this category with the piece that Andy Wardle created. I just really love the story it tells. One entry I wasn't quite sure about in which category it was entered, and thanks again to Ellie for providing the picture, was this arcade built around some epic scale space marines. Really well crafted, from the custom Mordaka sign on the top and the game over writing on the quote-unquote screen, and beautifully painted, including the orc freehand on the side. Really a fun little entry that deserves some attention. The Duel category has been brought back, and thank God it did, because it's always fun to see how people try to find creative solutions to the puzzle of having 2 minis interacting in dynamic ways. LKA's 3rd place entry tried to do that with making a Tyranid float through tentacles that wrap around a Nurgle Marine. While 2nd place is the more classic "I'm pointing at you, no I am pointing at you" approach, but James Taro did an outstanding job at creating something dynamic in a very minimal space that also pays homage to Golden Demon history. The Sororita blowing up a killer can clearly being a nod to Victoria Lamb's awesome OSL piece from more than 20 years ago. I love how only that claw peeking out of the explosion is enough to tell the story. Ben Cantor entered this duel, which received a commended pin. Ben is always creating these ambitious scenes where everything is scratch built and often invests north of 500 hours into them. Here you can see a few shots of the sculpting. He made an interesting video that documents the whole process, but it also sheds some light on how to approach entering Golden Demon, especially in the context of scratch building your entries. Because while you are allowed to enter full scratch builds, and we already saw that you can win with a piece that doesn't have a single plastic bit in it, you have to make sure that you stay within the IP of Games Workshop. The figure has to look like it could have been sculpted by them. Ben does this juxtaposition of the latest version of Gaskull and his orc, and I think it becomes evident that there is a style difference. I'd say his version looks a lot more like a very early Gaskull artwork from the 90s, but not like the current Games Workshop style. And while it could be a few other things why this only got commended, I think it was worth mentioning if you are thinking about entering Golden Demon. And it's a good excuse to look at this very creative entry for a minute. I also linked the whole video in the description if you want to check it out. Youngbloods is always a fascinating category to me. The level showcased here would have put a lot of our painting to shame just 15 years ago, and it's unbelievable to me. I like that Carlos Tapia's entry is rooted more in an heavy metal style approach, but at the same time adding non-metallic elements on the gun. And then Brennan Feist demonstrates some great understanding of shapes and how to define them in a way more aware to how light behaves on them. And finally, Zachary Mallott jumps right into OSL effects that probably gave him the edge here on his Ultramarine. The open competition is always a place for out-of-the-box thinking and where painters can let their creativity flow. And this iteration saw this lovely gaming table by Adam Thiel. There's dice and terrain and two armies placed opposite one another. And then there's even some extra terrain in that lower shelf below the table. And one thing that amazes me is that some people just enter with their online names and then even get called on stage by them. I just love picturing the scene when Josh Orkbot gets called on stage for winning second place. The winning entry is a piece we have already seen in the competition in Essen last year, where it was not awarded anything, but over in the US of A it took gold in the open category. Thibaut built this one completely from scratch. I also adore the paint job, very striking skin tones on the boar. I really think this is what the open category should be. And finally, the Slayer Sword goes to Borgia's beautiful Griffin Rider. I think along with the Chaos Dwarf by Raphael Bouillon, it was probably the most spectacular entry. So congratulations for being chosen as the best in show entry and lifting the prestigious Slayer Sword. And congratulations to all the winners. I gotta say, it was really refreshing not to see any major drama around this year's competition. It always leaves a bad aftertaste of what should be a get-together by like-minded people celebrating creativity, and their love for the hobby is overshadowed by weird decisions, mismanagement, hurt egos, and so on. So I'm really happy the conversation this time has been centered around the new improvements Games Workshop has made around adding more ways to recognize people's efforts and by giving out these extra pins, and also how many great pieces were entered this year. Sure, there'll always be some that are disappointed by the results, and that's fair, I guess, but such is the nature of Golden Demon, or really any competition that only rewards the top three. There's lots of subjectivity involved, as with any creative competition. All of these factors combined still make it a bit of a lottery, as I like to say. So you got to be aware of this when entering something and accept that aspect for what it is. Thanks for looking at these great pieces with me. Keep pushing that pigment, and I'll see you next time.